In ancient times, when the world was still young and the nights were bathed only by starlight, there was a man named Enoch. He lived far from the bustling cities, in a village surrounded by green fields and tall trees. His days were simple, marked by work in the fields, conversation around the campfire, and affection for his family. But there was something different about Enoch, something that made everything around him seem lighter when he passed by. His heart was pure, and everyone could feel it. He treated every neighbor with kindness, always willing to listen and help, never raising his voice, even when things were difficult. Enoch loved to walk at dusk. After saying goodbye to his children and his wife, he would walk alone along small dirt paths, between plantations and pastures, until he reached a small hill. There, lying on the grass, he would watch the sky change color and talk to God. And it wasn't a hurried prayer, nor were they repeated words. It was an intimate conversation, full of trust. He shared his fears, gave thanks for his food, and spoke of his dreams for his children and for the people. At many moments, he seemed immersed in an invisible presence, something profound that comforted his heart even on the coldest nights. Sometimes, while bathing his feet in the stream, he thought of the men and women of his village, the fights between neighbors, the lies he heard. He felt sad to see how many had strayed from the path of righteousness, how evil was slowly growing without anyone noticing. Even so, he never judged. On the contrary, he was always the first to offer forgiveness, to reach out to those in need. His children asked him, "Father, why are you so kind even to those who mistreat you?" And Enoch would smile, stroke his children's heads, and say, "When we walk with God, we learn to truly love." They say that in heaven, when God looked down on earth, he saw Enoch and rejoiced. He was not like other leaders. He did not seek power or riches. His greatest treasure was inner peace, the contentment that comes from doing the right thing. And over time, this became visible to everyone. Neighbors began to notice that when Enoch was around, disagreements calmed down and there were more smiles. When an orphan needed help, it was Enoch who reached out. When a widow was alone, it was he who shared his bread. People began to ask, "Who is this man who talks to God as he talks to a friend?" On quiet nights, as the stars shone brightly in the distance, Enoch felt a living certainty in his heart. He was not alone. And it was in the solitude of one of these walks, amid the sound of crickets and the smell of wet earth, that something extraordinary began to happen. That afternoon, as the sun hid behind the mountains, Enoch felt the air changing around him. The wind, which had been whispering through the leaves, now seemed to caress his face with a special tenderness. He walked up the hill as usual, but his heart was beating faster. There was an expectation in the air, as if creation itself were holding its breath. Enoch stopped in front of an ancient tree, already accustomed to hearing his conversations with God, and there he closed his eyes. He whispered words of gratitude, asked for protection for his family, prayed for the people of the village, especially those who were lost, immersed in wrong choices. Suddenly, a soft light enveloped the place. It was not the golden glow of the sunset or the stars. It was a light that came from within and around Enoch, warming every part of his being. He felt such a deep peace that all his fears dissipated. God's presence became palpable, as real as the touch of a friendly hand. Enoch did not see a face, did not hear a loud voice, but he understood every feeling, every silent invitation. He understood that he needed to trust even more, that God had plans greater than he could imagine. Meanwhile, in the village, people noticed that something different had happened to Enoch. His serenity, once admired, now overflowed. His eyes shone with a light that came not only from his emotions, but from something much deeper. The villagers, curious and a little fearful, began to seek his company, asking for advice and prayers. Even those who had previously mocked his faith listened silently, trying to understand where such kindness came from. One of the neighbors, who had long envied Enoch for his simplicity and joy, approached him and asked, "How can you maintain such hope, even with so much evil around us?" Enoch, looking into the man's eyes, replied simply, "When we walk with God, He sustains us from within, even if the world outside collapses." Time passed, and stories of Enoch's conversations with God spread. Some said he was different, chosen. Others thought he was just a good man. But in Enoch's heart, he grew more certain that the more he walked with God, the more he wanted to leave everything else behind and keep going forward into the unknown. That night, before returning home, Enoch looked up at the sky one last time and made a promise in his heart. He would never stop trusting, no matter what happened. Little did he know that the greatest transformation of his life was about to take place. The days passed quietly in the village, but in Enoch's heart, a restlessness grew with each passing evening. It was as if with each walk to the hill, his steps became lighter and the world around him grew more distant. His connection with God intensified, and with each prayer he felt more transformed, filled with a joy that was difficult to explain. However, this new peace attracted suspicious glances from the village elders and most powerful men. Some began to whisper that Enoch was straying from tradition, that his exaggerated faith would jeopardize the established order. There were those who thought that Enoch was seeking the title of leader for himself, even though he never showed any desire to rule. One night, a group gathered in the shade of the trees to discuss this. Among them was a stern man named Lamed, who did not approve of Enoch's influence over the young people. Lamed said that people were becoming lazy, waiting for miracles instead of working, deluded by the stories of that silent man. So they decided to confront Enoch. The next morning, they arrived at his door as a group and found him sitting on the ground, sharing bread with an orphan boy. Lamed, in a harsh voice, asked why he spent so much time away, why he no longer participated in the decisions of the people. He suggested that Enoch was putting dangerous ideas into their hearts, weakening the village's resolve. Enoch listened silently, looking each one in the eye. Instead of responding in kind, he spoke gently but firmly. "Every path I follow is guided by God. I do not seek to divide, but to unite. I want nothing more than to share the good I receive." The group withdrew in confusion, speechless in the face of such humility. However, this only increased their suspicions. In the days that followed, murmurs echoed through the streets. Some avoided Enoch, while others followed him even more closely, enchanted by his tranquility. At home, his wife noticed the weight in his eyes, a mixture of longing and hope. Even though he felt loneliness growing, Enoch did not hesitate. Every time he climbed the hill, God's presence welcomed him, and that supernatural peace washed away his fears. But he sensed an urgency in the encounters, as if a passage were opening before him. He felt that soon his faith would be tested definitively, and he accepted the challenge with a clean heart full of love. The night came heavy, bringing with it a tense atmosphere over the village. The sky, once starry, seemed covered by dense clouds. Enoch felt a mixture of fear and excitement in his chest, as if he knew he was close to something irreversible. He saw in the faces of his neighbors the fear of those who dread the unknown, the forced silence of those who judged him, and at the same time, the timid curiosity of others, waiting to see how far his communion with God would go. When his children went to bed, he walked outside. The icy wind took his breath away, but Enoch did not retreat. He stood still in front of the field, looking at the dark line of the horizon, where his walks always began. His knee touched the damp ground, and, with his eyes closed, he searched for that warm light he had felt so many times before. But nothing came. There was only the harsh silence of dawn. For the first time, he felt no presence, no relief, no comfort. Only the most complete loneliness, an emptiness that weighed as heavily as the night itself. His body trembled, not from the cold, but from the feeling of abandonment. "Why did you leave me alone?" he murmured, his face lit only by the faint fire inside the house. The moment lasted for several anxious heartbeats. Then, out of nowhere, a figure approached. It was not divine, it did not shine, but it was the shadow of Lamed, accompanied by others. They stopped in front of Enoch, trying to find weakness in his eyes. Lamed accused him again, this time with anger. "You are no longer one of us. Your words have only brought division. Your faith weakens us. Why do you convince so many to seek an invisible God when the harvest depends on our hands?" Others murmured, but Enoch, though dejected, rose silently. God's absence at that moment seemed like a test, or perhaps an invitation to look deeper within himself. Instead of justifying himself, Enoch faced Lamed and all the hard faces before him, feeling something rise from his own emptiness, courage. "When all is silent, the heart speaks," he said at last, his voice sounding strangely firm. "My faith does not diminish you. Each of you is free, but so am I. And if my hope troubles you, it is because it is true. I would rather walk without human support than lose confidence in the only one who has never betrayed me." A heavy silence fell over the group. No one seemed willing to go any further. But that night, Enoch understood that the true path of faith was not always bright or comfortable. It was sometimes lonely and arid. And in that journey, not only did his soul mature, but so did his will to continue. Even in the shadows, even without answers, taking each new step on the dark earth, certain that this was the faith that truly transformed. At daybreak, the village was plunged into a heavy silence. The shadows of the previous night seemed to have left a mark on the residents, who glanced sideways at Enoch's house as they whispered among themselves. Inside the house, the family awoke with a feeling of uncertainty, but found Enoch sitting at the table, his face calm and his gaze serene, as if he had been strengthened by the very emptiness he had felt hours before. He embraced his children and his wife, conveying a silent, deep, and palpable peace with his touch. The transformation within him was evident to anyone who cared to see it. His gestures became even gentler, his words soft, always full of hope even in the face of hostility. The tension, however, did not dissipate. Lamed, uneasy with Enoch's serenity, gathered the people again in the square in the center of the village. Many were undecided, torn between rigid tradition and the desire for tranquility that Enoch emanated. Lamed spoke passionately, inflaming fears and pointing to Enoch, claiming that if they did not remove him, they would all suffer punishment from the heavens, that this man's false hope would bring misfortune upon the people. The atmosphere was tense, ready to explode with anger or fear. At that moment, Enoch walked through the crowd. There was no arrogance in his posture, only humility. A deep silence fell when he stopped in front of everyone. Even the toughest felt a strange tension in the air, as if something invisible was hovering over them. Enoch closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and a faint, almost imperceptible light surrounded his figure. It was not lightning, it was not fire, but a soft glow that emanated from within, drawing the attention of everyone present, even the children playing on the ground. He spoke of love, mercy, and the need to forgive the mistakes of others, saying that this light was not his, but a reflection of the grace that reaches those who desire to be true to God. His words melted the anger in their hearts, comforting even those who were overcome with fear. Lamed, in his fury, looked into Enoch's eyes and found himself disarmed by the silent truth that dwelled there. Little by little, the people lowered their stones and their arms, and an unexpected peace descended upon the place. No one could explain that clarity or the power of reconciliation that unfolded there, but everyone felt a weight being lifted, an ancient burden disappearing with the wind. Enoch, inside, realized that he was no longer alone. God dwelt in every humble decision, every refusal of violence, every tear of forgiveness. That moment changed the village. The transformation was not only in Enoch. It happened in the eyes of those who chose to believe, especially those who, even without understanding, decided to leave fear behind and experience the light. As the days passed, the village seemed to breathe easier, as if Enoch's words and the silent light had washed away the stains of fear and discord. However, not everyone was at peace. Lamed, although touched by the events, struggled internally with pride and a sense of loss of control. He spent his nights restless, watching Enoch's actions from afar and trying to understand the serene strength that gave him authority without imposition, simply through the testimony of his life. One morning, a storm broke over the fields in the middle of harvest, threatening to destroy everything the village had planted with such effort. The people ran through the rain, trying to save what they could, but it was like facing an invisible giant. Desperate and hopeless, many knelt in the mud, crying out, while others, paralyzed by the fear of losing their family's livelihood, looked to Enoch as if he were the last anchor in the face of impending tragedy. Enoch placed his hands on the soggy ground, closed his eyes, and prayed silently, not for himself, but for the community, that God's will prevail, but that there also be compassion and help for those in need. At that moment, a stronger wind blew, pushing the dense clouds aside and opening a clear patch of sky over the fields. A ray of sunlight touched the earth, illuminating the village and the plantation like a luminous arm piercing the storm. The rain stopped suddenly. There was mud, there was damage, but the plants remained standing, miraculously preserved. The people wept and smiled, looking at Enoch with new eyes, no longer as a stranger, but as one who, even in the face of destruction, trusted in an invisible hope and managed to inspire faith in others. Lamed finally approached Enoch. His gaze was humble and silently asked for forgiveness. Enoch embraced him, whispering a blessing. In that simple gesture, God's presence was manifested not in an apparent miracle, but in the converted heart of a former enemy. The decision that unfolded that day was not only about the land that was spared, but about the people who chose to love instead of accuse, to trust instead of fear. Enoch's faith had become a source of strength for many there, and now the village was different, marked forever by the encounter between human frailty and the invisible action of the divine. The days passed and calm came, accompanied by deep reflection on all the events that had taken place. The village, once divided, now experienced harmonious coexistence. Respect had taken the place of fear. Misunderstandings, once common, gave way to cooperation and sincere listening. Even Lamed, transformed by Enoch's forgiveness and gesture, devoted himself to helping his neighbors with a humility that surprised everyone. Still, something pulsed in Enoch's heart. It was as if an invisible door was about to open, revealing the designs that silently guided his entire journey. One golden afternoon, as the fields were tinged with the soft light of dusk, Enoch felt an irresistible urge to climb the hill again. He left alone, leaving behind a peaceful village, a protected home, and many hearts awakened to hope. High above, the wind seemed to sing ancient songs. Enoch asked for nothing. He only gave thanks. His understanding, once shrouded in doubt, was beginning to take shape. He realized that all the pain, every anguish he had faced, and every act of patience had prepared not only his heart, but the hearts of all the people for the true miracle: communion, forgiveness, and faith in God above all circumstances. As he meditated, an enveloping and luminous presence surrounded him, denser and more unmistakable than all other times. Time seemed suspended. Enoch understood, with overwhelming intensity, that his mission was not only to lead the people to reconciliation, but to show that to exist is to walk side by side with the divine, even amid struggles and uncertainties. His arms opened, not to ask or wait, but to surrender his life entirely to the greater purpose. Below, the entire village, as if moved by a silent call, began to make its way up the hill. Children, elders, even the most suspicious, climbed together in reverent silence. When they reached the top, a golden light enveloped Enoch, who now radiated an almost supernatural peace. Everyone felt in their hearts the answers to their fears and doubts. They understood, together with Enoch, that the purpose of everything was to learn to love and trust without reservation. The climax of the journey came at that moment. The invisible bond between heaven and earth became palpable, and everyone felt that nothing would ever be the same again. After that memorable night on the hill, the village seemed to have awakened to a new existence. Everyday gestures took on a deeper meaning. Every smile, every sharing, and every reconciliation became a seed of transformation. Many who had previously harbored resentment now approached former enemies to ask for forgiveness or simply to talk under the shade of the trees, sharing stories and dreams. Bonds that had once been fragile grew stronger, and trust, which had seemed unattainable for so long, blossomed in every family. Enoch walked among the people, feeling in his own heart the joy of small daily victories. That man, whose silent faith had raised questions and hostility, was now sought after for advice, hugs, and prayers. Children followed in his footsteps, repeating words of blessing and songs learned during his afternoons of teaching. The land, once punished by storms, showed vigor by giving abundant harvests, as if even the fields responded to the restored harmony. Lamed, recognized for his courage in admitting his mistake and for his newly awakened compassion, became an example of humility and renewal. With each new dawn, he visited homes to listen to people's difficulties, sharing food and offering to work wherever there was a need. It was impossible for anyone not to notice the change in Lamed, and many understood that here was living proof that no one is lost when there is forgiveness and a sincere desire to start over. Widows and orphans, once on the margins of the community, began to receive constant care and attention. Simple celebrations and gatherings around the fire became frequent, celebrating life and victory over fear and loneliness. Enoch felt, with a sweet tranquility, that his role was being fulfilled and that God dwelt not only on the mountaintop, but in every home illuminated by hope. There was no material wealth there, but the wealth of peaceful hearts, generous words, and shared bread. The people had learned that the greatest healing comes from the soul, and that true victory is born when many, together, decide to build a new beginning. The silence of the nights was no longer marked by tension, but by the certainty that the light had found a permanent home among them. The sky dawned a serene blue, as if the day itself knew of the greatness that was approaching. The village awoke early, moved by a common feeling of expectation. Men and women, children and the elderly, all felt a sweet restlessness in their hearts, a silent certainty that something extraordinary was about to happen. Enoch, already up at first light, felt a deep peace in his heart that dispelled any lingering doubt or fear. That day, he walked among the houses, smiling, exchanging words of encouragement and blessings, gently touching the children's heads. Wherever he went, the residents seemed to feel a renewing impulse, something invisible but undeniable, as if their pains and worries were alleviated simply by his presence. Many stopped their daily chores to walk alongside him. In a short time, a crowd formed spontaneously, all supported by a common desire to be together and in communion. When Enoch reached the foot of the hill, the footsteps of the people followed him in solemn silence. He climbed first, calm, each movement conveying surrender and trust. When he reached the top, he knelt down and opened his arms to the sky, his eyes closed, while a cool breeze caressed everyone's faces. Suddenly, an exuberant light descended from the heavens, enveloping Enoch in a splendor that seemed to belong to the divine itself. All those present fell to their knees, overcome by a shock of reverence and ecstasy. Hearts burst into silent tears, indecipherable feelings filling the air. Time stood still. The light grew, surpassing all understanding and touching each soul with infinite tenderness. It was as if ancient burdens, inner scars, and deepest sorrows were being torn away, giving way to a clear joy that calmed old longings. In the midst of that brightness, Enoch was gently lifted from the ground, his feet no longer touching the earth. Smiles of amazement and praise mingled with the voices that timidly began to sing together a song of thanksgiving and surrender. It was clear to everyone, Enoch was being taken to God, his faith and mission finally recognized and fulfilled. As he ascended, the light reverberated throughout the village, enveloping every home, every heart, transforming the ancient promise into living reality. From that day forward, no one doubted the love that dwells between heaven and earth. Faith was finally rewarded in a pure way, forever transforming those who remained there. After Enoch's ascension, the village experienced days when everything seemed different. The air seemed lighter, everyday noises had a new softness, and each person, looking around, noticed a different sparkle in the eyes of their neighbors. There were no more doubts or old fears haunting the conversations at sunset. Instead, families gathered at the end of each day to give thanks and remember the man whose unshakable faith had opened paths of reconciliation and hope. Lamed, whose transformation had touched so many, found himself constantly surrounded by young people, sharing what he had learned about humility and trust. The orphans, once forgotten, now played and learned alongside everyone else, and the widows no longer experienced loneliness but were central figures in days of feasting and celebration. Enoch's once simple home became a gathering place and a center of attention, a place where his teachings echoed through songs, prayers, and stories repeated from generation to generation. Enoch's example taught each of them that true greatness does not lie in riches or power, but in the courage to be honest, to care for others, and to believe, even when everything seems against you. The memory of the day Enoch was taken up and light never faded from their hearts. It was this miracle that sealed everyone's commitment to keep forgiveness and love alive in their daily actions. Whenever a doubt arose or a conflict threatened their harmony, the words and serene gaze of that man came back to mind, calming tempers and reminding everyone that God dwells where there is truth and compassion. Time passed, and Enoch's story was told and retold countless times around the fire, becoming the foundation of that people's faith. His departure was not a sign of absence, but the certainty that simple faith can change the course of things, heal old wounds, and bring hope where once there was only fear. The great legacy left by Enoch was this: anywhere and anytime, if there is love, forgiveness, and trust in something greater, even the most humble can be instruments of light in the world. And so, generation after generation, the village flourished, always guided by the living truth that we are called to walk together toward God. If you were moved by this story, don't forget to like it, comment on what you thought of Enoch's story, and subscribe to the channel to receive more inspiring stories like this one.